Welcome everyone to 52 Living Ideas. Tonight's the Dao De Jing. We'll be covering verses 47, 48, and I don't think we'll get to 49 this evening, but as always, type exclamation point in the chat to share the version of the Dao De Jing that most speaks to you, and we can get started. Evanique.
So mine is as the God as nature sees God, a Christian reading. So number 47. Without going outside, you can know the whole world. Without looking out the window, you can know heaven's way. The future out you seek, the further out you seek, the less you understand. Therefore, the sage knows without needing to travel, understands without needing to see, accomplishes without doing.
Thank you very much, Evanique. Next up, I have Mike, followed by David.
My version is Wayne Dyer's, verse 47. Without going out the door, know the world. Without looking out the window, you may see the ways of heaven. The farther one goes, the less one knows. Therefore, the sage does not venture forth, and yet knows, does not look, and yet names, does not strive, and yet attains completion.
Thank you, Mike. David, followed by Margarita, then Madeline, then Penny.
Yes, thanks. So the Hermanold. Without going out of his own door, a man may know the world. Without looking out his own window, a man may know the Tao of heaven. For the farther one goes, the less one knows. Thus it is with the sage. He does not go forth, and yet he attains his goal. Although he does not look around him, he is able to give things their names. Without fuss, he brings all to the completion by non-action.
My turn. I will read in Bahasa.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was on mute there. Yes, I said thank you, David. And yes, Margarita, you're next. Thank you.
Okay. Tidak perlu keluar pintu, tapi dapat mengetahui masalah dunia. Tidak perlu mengintip dari jendela, tapi dapat melihat hukum alam. Semakin jauh keluar, semakin sedikit yang diketahui. Maka seorang bijak, walau tidak pergi kemana-mana, tapi mengetahui. Walau tidak mencari sendiri, tapi mengenal semuanya. Walau tidak berbuat apa, tapi semuanya selesai. Thank you.
Thank you. Madeline, followed by Penny.
This is the Jiafu Feng and Jane English translation. Without going outside, you may know the whole world. Without looking through the window, you may see the ways of heaven. The farther you go, the less you know. Thus the sage knows without traveling. He sees without looking. He works without doing.
Thank you, Madeline. Penny.
Okay, this is Stephen Mitchell.
Okay.
Without opening your door, you can open your heart to the world. Without looking out your window, you can see the essence of the Tao. The more you know, the less you understand. The master arrives without leaving, sees the light without looking, achieves without doing a thing.
Thank you, Penny. If there's anybody else that wishes to share their version, go ahead and type exclamation point in the chat. But other than that, I'm going to actually just ask David to share his version. Or Jason, I'm sorry, David.
Oh, you okay?
Yeah, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I think this one is relatively simple, and then I guess today we will go to 49 because I think these two are simple. If you look at the Chinese, it's everything. You will see the almost all the sentence start with this word, 不 That means no, without. So most of the translation catch up these things. So I'm going to read it. Without traveling, you can know the world. Without peeking through the lattice window, you can see the heavenly Tao. The further you go, the less you learn. That's why the sage does as follows. Without traveling, he knows. Without appearing, he renowned. He is renowned. Without acting, he achieves. So basics, this one, I think is talking about a little bit paradoxy, but the more you do, the less you get, the more, the less. And then the second part talking about without doing something, then you can do, you can achieve without action. You can gain, you can be renowned without appearing. You can know things without traveling. So basically talk about we do a lot of nonsense, meaningless moving. I think that's the essence of this lesson. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you.
Interesting. Aman, would you like to comment? Or do you have anything you would like to share?
Yes. This is one of those very pithy, eloquent little verses within the Dao De Jing, and it does somewhat echo chapter 26 in the idea of being withdrawn from the matters of the world so that you can focus your efforts solely upon the Tao. But I wanted to actually bring attention to one particular word. This is the word you, which I spoke with Jason when we worked on this. This character, which I think is sometimes the verse is translated as peeking through a window or peering through a window. This very specifically actually means a lattice window, which is, if you can actually picture the sort of front facade of old Chinese homes, this would be sort of that gated lattice structure that sits at the front of a house. And that's, there's imagery at work here. Anyone who's spent too much time watching Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, or 1001 other Chinese films have seen this sort of, scholar gentleman's front door of their home, and this beautiful latticed work sort of door, and this notion of peering out through a lattice window or peeking through the lattice window. There's almost a double meaning of, on the one hand, the sage doesn't need to travel abroad to know the world, but should stay within their home to do their studies. And I think the henpecked young student, longing to go run and play with his friends, but needing to stay in to do his lessons is something that's a really common trope. This single word is very evocative of that image. And so I do think there's another layer of meaning to this, of knowing the world without leaving the home, not merely being a encouragement for reclusion, but an encouragement for devotion to study as well, to devotion to the things that can be learned within one's home if one just spends enough time with the right works, with the right books, with the right master or the right people. You can gain more, I don't want to say knowledge because that's the antithesis of what they're, but more enlightenment through those sort of interactions, through that sort of atmosphere, than you would running from adventure to adventure, like going on tourist trip after tourist trip when on holiday, so that you get a curated version of the world, but never actually see the real thing or hear the real testimony. So yeah, I do think there's a little bit more in this chapter than first meets the eye, but it all kind of hinges on how one sees that word you and whether or not they take away that same sort of, like I said, meme or trope or image.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, personally, and I just like to share a couple of ideas really quickly about this one when I see the different versions. I really think of it as this distinction between knowledge and wisdom and wise action. And as you know, Amana just stated, it's not just attaining the knowledge, it's actually how are you integrating it. Would that be a fair assessment, Amon or Jason?
Yeah, I would say that that's the difference between, we tend to think of book learning as the opposite of experiential knowing, but we live in a world where that sort of learning is, very, very prevalent. Anyone can go pick up any book on anything just about anywhere. That was not the case in, a couple millennia ago. A book was a precious and rare item that somebody might have, and the ability to read it, the ability to immerse yourself in it and really suck out the nuance from it was something that was a pretty reserved experience. And I think that that is something that is also evoked from this passage.
Thank you for that, Amon. Jason, would you like to add anything before I go to everybody else? Or
Yes, let me show the screen. That's one thing is interesting. There's only can see it in Chinese. I try to catch in English, but it's very difficult. Okay, if you look at these two sentences, let me show these two sentences. First two sentences, the translation is easy. Basically, you talk about, the first one and the second one, it's without traveling, you can know the world. And without peeking through a lattice window, you can see, or you can see the heaven's way. Okay, but you look at the Chinese, you will see the first word, that's so-called pairing. Okay, through the 1,000 years, or a lot of Chinese writing, they have the pairing. If you look at these two sentences, they pair. Okay, the first, there's no, right? And the second word, that's the verb, which this word means out. Okay, this word means picking. Okay, then the third word, the first sentence is door. That means not out the door. And the second one is not pick window. Okay, or that is, right? And you can know this word, and you can see this word. Okay, so that's all pair to pair. Okay, without go outdoor, or without picking lattice, you can see, you can know, you can see. These two words, 天下 and 天道. 天下, we translate as the world. That means sky under. Okay, this one means sky star. So they all pair. Okay, they all these two sentences all pair. Okay, there's a lot of because the uniqueness of the Chinese character, because it's monotone, and it's a character, everything in the same size. So it always have all the writer, they try very hard, okay, to pair. Okay, so this one is a perfect pairing, and then it's only can see in Chinese. And then I try to translate, try to catch this one, but it's very difficult. But I just like to use this chance to share. Yeah, thank you.
thank you for sharing that. And so now we will go to everybody else for their comments to share what they have taken away from this particular verse. I have Douglas, followed by Chang, then Madeline.
Yeah, I would. I have my book at home. I'm in the hospital, but I had successful surgery, so don't worry about me on that. Okay, I had neck surgery. Anyway, the whole thing isn't this kind of interesting? You look at Socrates talking to the oracle. Okay, two different things. One is east, one is west, right? Okay, but what Socrates said at the oracle, they asked him why he was so smart, and he said, "You all go around telling people how much you know. I tell you, I don't know anything." Now, when you read the I Ching, it's kind of saying in so many words the same thing that he was saying. So it makes it, what intelligence is and so on. To admit that you don't know too much. And that's what, in the I Ching is kind of hinting at, that it's actually saying, how do you know?
Thank you, Douglas. Followed by next up is Chang.
Yeah, so actually, I'm not totally agree with this, what they say. I think it's really depends on the personality. We talk about introvert, extrovert. I think the introvert can learn, don't need to go out, but the extrovert, I have to go out to learn. So I found I have to travel every few months, I have to go out. And the funny thing is like, I found you can learn more about yourself or where you live when you're at the distance. For example, I actually learned Dao De Jing when I'm in America. I never will read, I have no interest when I was in China. I think the distance, actually, I also see other people, like their Chinese guy was wearing this Chinese robe in France. He feel more Chinese when he is in France than he was in China. I think the distance actually help you to understand who you are better. And also there's a saying in China said, read 10,000 books, travel thousands miles, which help you to learn. I think the reading is very important, to be quiet and read, be yourself, but at the same time, seeing the world also important.
Thank you for that, Chang. Jason.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on Gen comment on that. Yeah, thank you for your comment. I think we are in the same situation. I learned the Dao De Jing and when I was young in Taiwan, and then I come to America, and then got a new meaning on that. So, and I hope again you stay for the next chapter, because I think the 48, the chapter 48 and the 47 are connected. You talk about the not going out, and then you can learn, not picking through. You can know the sky. I think that's not necessary. Ask you to stay home to study. Okay, I think they are talking about Dao. So I will ask everybody wait to 48. I think that you will see the connection between 47 and the 48. Yeah.
Thank you, Madeline.
Well, I read this on a metaphorical level, as well as a literal one, of the building or the home being the body or the external self, and that it was that this chapter was about not always turning outwards to the world of the senses to gain knowledge, but to turn to the, I don't know what you'd call it, the Tao within, to learn. And so that it's not constant sensory stimulation, either through movement, going out the door, or of, I assume visual, looking through the latticed window is kind of a stand-in for sensory stimulation. Is it necessary to gain wisdom? And I appreciate your distinction, Joe, between wisdom and knowledge.
Thank you. Actually, I had some similar takeaways as to what you were thinking as well. It's sensory or sensory information, that how we take it in, but also trusting ourselves with that sensory information. But Aman, would you like to comment?
I do hate jumping the line in front of everyone, because I think there are some great comments here. And I do have to say, I like Madeline's interpretation of this chapter. It's a great way of reading it that I think really appeals to a lot of the sentiment that exists within the Dao De Jing. And on a principled level, I agree with Zhang about travel as a means of better knowing ourselves. I do think that that is actually an invaluable thing that people ought to do to better know themselves and their homes. But I try and place this in time and context of, warring states, ancient China. This is not a time where pleasure travel is really a concept that anyone would do. You would only travel, if you imagine this as instructions for a princeling, someone with the means to mount up, enough of an entourage to go to some other grand place because that grand place has been talked about. Well, that's a lot of expense. That's a lot of effort. It's a great danger to the individual, but it might appeal to that youthful spirit in a great way. So I do think the admonishment exists there in context, in place and time and context, though I don't think it is as universalizable, if I can turn a phrase, to the modern experience that we may have as affluence in a Western world. All of us have at least the means to be digitally here. So getting there from here to there is probably not as fraught an enterprise as it would have been at the time and place. But I wanted to say, I absolutely agree. I do think travel is invaluable, excuse me, and that you may become more of your national identity the further from home you are. I've never seen a more Irish person than an Irishman in Boston versus just some lad in Dublin.
Very well said. Very well said. And I appreciate those comments. And it is interesting to see the distinction between the way we would have interpreted this during Lao Tzu's time and how we can actually reinterpret them, and they're still applicable in some way. We're just reinterpreting them a little bit different. The historical context is really important to keep in mind, though. But I like how everybody's able to make it their own still. That's one of my favorite parts of this meetup. So next up, I have Katie, then Mike.
This reminded me of a past chapter when they were talking about naming, trying to break things down into its constituent parts to try to understand the whole, to think that you can comprehend the whole. And I think that it's saying that's like the Tao is simple. You can, understand it from home. It's not that, like, using Aman's example, it's not that you wouldn't know Ireland by going to Ireland and meeting Ireland people. It's just that if you think you're going to understand everything about the Tao, it's making the Tao more complicated, something that's kind of more simple to understand.
Yeah, it's not merely aggregating information. That's the way I look at it. It's more about having context and understanding and knowledge. Well, I don't want to call it knowledge because that would be incorrect, but wisdom. And that's what I want to keep coming back to. That you essentially can go out and have all these experiences, but it doesn't mean you're necessarily going to be any more wise because you've had these experiences. And the fact that you understand that about yourself, there's a sense of humility that comes along with that. That's really important because you understand the limits of your own knowledge. Therefore, that is actually wisdom in and of itself. So I have Mike next.
Yeah, Joe, I'd like to take the words that you just said and have Dorothy Gale from The Wizard of Oz say them. Because to me, that was the whole crux of the movie. Right. And that was everything. Every time I read this verse, she went out looking for that wisdom and looking for herself and, her heart's desire, I think is what she called it in the movie. But that's exactly what you just said. I'm just using somebody else's voice there. And at the end of the movie, she said, the next time I want my heart's desire, I realize I don't have to go out my front door. So I think the whole thing, like you said, wraps up to the point where there's a whole lot that you can do within your own four walls, that you can go out and you can search and you can have the experience, but the answers are probably the same in both places. You can take both, but Dorothy probably figured it out best.
I love it. Anytime we can incorporate modern cinema into the Tao is like, it just makes more sense. And I just love that the example of Dorothy. It was awesome. So next up I have, well, actually, no, I don't have anybody. Jason or Margarita.
Yeah, I try to reflect on this chapter. Sometimes I think I deal with this. I search externally to find answer. That I realize sometimes my problem is created by my eyeglasses So I need to understand what kind of eyeglasses I'm using to see the world and to understand and to know things in the world, because sometimes by understanding the way I see the world, the way I want, what I want in the world is the first step that I need to do. So it's not just focusing on getting sensory information, like you say, but for understanding how I see the world. That's the first journey. Thank you.
Interesting. Yeah, it's understanding ourselves before it's actually understanding the world and our perception of things. And I think that that's a really, really great point. We can go out and still be blind. So that's, one of the main takeaways that I had from this one. Would anybody else like to comment? I know Jason said this would be fast, but so Brian. You're muted. There you go.
Yes, I do have actually, it's more of a question.
Sure.
Since we're bringing in different perspectives, when I first read this, I thought of the notion of common sense. And I'll give you a reference or a framework for that in a second. But I'm wondering how you all have used the word wisdom. I'm not sure wisdom comes up in this verse. How would wisdom, why wisdom and not common sense? And how are those two different? This is, so here's the common sense reference that popped to my mind. Adam Smith, when he wrote about the difference between farmers who lived in villages and people who lived in cities, and the people that live in cities tended to specialize and develop expertise. So they had a lot of knowledge in a limited area. But he pointed out that outside of that limited area, they didn't have much common sense, and that the farmer in the village might have more common sense. So it just the analogy, the parallels here struck me. But here we're not talking about living in a village as opposed to a city. We're talking about a farm or staying at home as opposed to going out. But that still the question remains, what's the difference between this wisdom that you all are talking about and this kind of common sense? Or to what ways are they the same?
It's a fantastic question. Can I actually give an answer and then I'll let him on correct me? But actually I'll let him on go.
Oh no, I was interested to hear your answer because I don't have it.
So I mean, I would, this is the only way I would distinguish it, is that I look at common sense as something that is instinctual, something that is just you act on. It's a survival mechanism. Whereas I look at wisdom as actually having a philosophy of determining what is true. And this idea of how you're incorporating information and deciding, you almost have a almost scientific approach to looking at how you're evaluating the world, and then you can apply that in what you're taking in to other situations to determine certain universal principles that you can then operate on, versus actually where common sense is just, well, I'm going to stay away from the fire because it's going to burn me. Where it's much more just based off of instinct and survival. I mean, that would be my answer, but I would please, I'd love to hear everybody else's.
I don't think your answer is necessarily wrong, but I do think there is an element of what I would think of as almost a Dostoevsky peasant romantic in vein in the Dao De Jing. There is a certain romanticizing of what the simple peasant's life must be. The first 4 lines of this all deal with traveling and knowledge. Without traveling, you can know the world. Without traveling, the sage knows. So I think that's where we get some element of this wisdom truth seeking from. But I do think that there's this those last two lines, without appearing, he is renowned. Without acting, he achieves. These smack less of a wisdom speak and more of that sort of common sense that I think Brian's pointing to in that peasant romance that is riddled throughout the Dao De Jing. This idea that you will, by tilling your fields and having a successful harvest, you're renowned because your family eats. It's not because you put yourself out there to be slapped on the back and held up by your village, merely the fact that you had enough for you and yours, and maybe even for a few other people, then you will receive renown without looking for it. You will achieve without doing, because if you're sort of the Lao Tzu's ideal peasant sage, then you've practiced enough Wu Wei to garner yourself a bumper crop harvest, as it were. And you can take that metaphor and extend it any way you want, whether it's growing food or building houses or ranching animals. The idea being you are doing sort of common, simple tasks. You are doing common, simple things in a very Wu Wei manner, not putting yourself first in front of others. And these are the ways that you will achieve real renown, real success, real achievements. So I do think Brian's hitting on something there. And I do think that we can look at this as wisdom seeking, but that wisdom seeking doesn't necessarily preclude that sort of simplistic, almost plebeian skill set and knowledge and wisdom that's found there.
Thank you for that. Actually, that brings a new perspective to me, and in a couple different ways. In the idea of, if you're seeking what is good, something that you're doing right then and there, tilling a field is something that you can still do well and not necessarily need to have rational principles apply. Is that a rough approximation? Is that a fair statement of mine?
I'll just say yes. I was looking for the icon, but I'll go ahead and interrupt with it. Yes, that sounds very apt.
Thank you. Thank you. So I have Douglas followed by Madeline. Followed by Jang. Douglas, go ahead. Okay, we can. Okay, there we go.
I got you. Okay. All right. Here's the whole thing. When I had my college students do a paper on I Ching, I could not evaluate it. Okay, so much I did it through the words and other things, but because interpretations can be different, or your interpretation may be different. Okay, it stands out than somebody else. So you're not gonna have the same. Maybe in a way that you could say yes, it's similar, but there'll be different interpretations of how you interpret it. Okay, so someone will say one thing, somebody else will say another thing. So we got to keep that in mind. When we work on the I Ching, it's what you feel in your own self. Okay, or what you sense in your own self. That's what stands out. But to say it's just this way or that way, I don't think that would be correct. I think it's more correct to interpret it through what you think it means. I think that's what it's reaching out to.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's basically when we ask the question, what did you take away from this particular passage? Everybody's expressing their perspectives. The best part about this, I think, one of the is that we can come here and then just thinking about it from what Aman had just shared regarding his perspective on common and distinction between common sense and wisdom. Actually, I can incorporate that now into my thinking, and it's it really is the best part of reading this together, where everybody can share their own personal takeaways and really kind of walk away thinking about things a little bit differently. It's what I like about this particular meetup the best. So thank you, Douglas. Next up, Jason, would you like to speak really quickly, and then I can go to Madeline and Jang.
Yeah, I just quickly respond to Brian's talk about the common sense and the wisdom. I think I probably, my view is a little bit different in this chapter. I think if you look at this chapter, only 7 stanza, but 4 of them start with no, 不, okay, without. So I think it doesn't matter we talk about wisdom or common sense. Lao Tzu is talking about the negative, without. Okay, so basically he is talking about, if we talk about wisdom, that's a negative negation kind of wisdom, not doing things. So not see, not doing, not going out, okay, and not dealing, not action, this kind of wisdom. That's I'd like to emphasize on this one. And it's tightly related to 48.
Thank you, Jason. Jang and Madeline to Jang.
Yes, this is just kind of a riff on what Aman was saying about the romanticization of the life of the soil, you know, an honest day's work and hard toil. So since this would be a largely literate and therefore fairly small audience for these writings at the time, the ruling classes, it seems as if this kind of in a way is saying to them, it's really fine. These peasants are very happy because they can attain enlightenment right there in their homes and fields. On the other hand, it is true that is possible and not unattainable at all. Also, the option of not going out and staying in is really quite, I think probably a very small segment of the population would be able to do that. And I think the closeness with nature, it's I mean, it's certainly an aesthetic that got heavily developed in Japan much later. Yeah, I guess that's all I have to say. It was very interesting, Aman. Thank you.
It is very interesting because as I'm making notes, I'm trying to think of a couple of things, but it also allows you to be present, you know, in a way, and at, you know, a certain degree of tranquility. If you have common sense, that, you know, you're not necessarily overthinking things as well. That's as I think more about this, the importance of common sense, and it also speaks to, I think, another important point, which is the value in everyday and ordinary activities for which most of us live, and seeing the value in everyday activities in ordinary life. I would argue that that is a form of wisdom in a way. But if you want to call it common sense, you know, I think it is common sense as well. But it's either way. I think it's an interesting way to look at life. Jang.
Yeah, I want to share my understanding of common sense and wisdom. I think common sense is kind of past experience wisdom. So it's based on the past experience, you accumulate all this wisdom and it becomes this habit, whatever, so subconscious. But then the wisdom, the true wisdom is like, things change, like especially now, things change more dramatically than in the past 1,000 years. So you have to new situation all the time. So you have to use your wisdom more than common sense, because common sense may expire very quickly, much quicker than before. So I think wisdom is like you use your experience and can respond to current situation very timely. I think that's my understanding between the difference, common sense and wisdom.
Thank you, Chang. Are there any other comments? The comments have been fantastic. David.
No, I was interested in kind of like the third line. I mean, there's again, I always look at these, whether it's straightforward or whether it's being ironic. I think it starts out, straightforward. You don't have to go out the door to know what's. I mean, putting Ursula Le Guin, you don't have to go out the door to know what goes on in the world. You don't have to look out the window to see the way of heaven. But the farther you go, the less you know. I mean, I think about that as another way that the farther one goes, the more one realizes that they don't know. In other words, there is more to know out there, as opposed to, you get more lost, but more in the sense that the other take is that there's so much more of the world that you're seeing, that when you get out of the bubble, your bubble just in this world, you're sort of, not looking out the window. You can be wise, but you realize how much more there is to know, that that what you thought you knew wasn't really the limits of knowledge. But then I was trying to see how that fits in with the latter verses, because again, as Jason's always said, I mean, it's more of a instruction to a prince. I mean, like, if this, I mean, this isn't necessarily a military stanza, but what would the royalty, or what would be the reason that Lao Tzu wanted to present this specific phrase to the prince, to leadership? What is he trying to get across with that? I mean, especially, the final line again in Ursula Le Guin is, the wise soul doesn't do but gets it done, or in some of the others, what was the other, that accomplishes without doing, or doesn't achieves everything, works without doing. I mean, it's about action. So, which, I mean, to me, in some ways, it's almost like two straightforward sentences and then almost an ironic one. I mean, it's like, okay, you don't have to go out the door. I mean, what this is about, knowledge, about wisdom, and then the farther you go, the less you know. So the more you see, the more that you realize that you don't know, the more you realize the limits of your knowledge, which in some way is wisdom. That you know what you don't know, or you realize more about what you don't know, and that, don't go out, you see. And I'd be interested to know, Aman and Jason, if there's anything special about knowing and seeing there with all of their illusions in Chinese. But the last, you see, you don't do, but you get it done. So again, it's more a matter of, to me, I mean, one could look at it getting out of one's mind and getting into action to actually accomplish something that, you can sit around all the time, not going outside, staring at your room, contemplating, not looking out the window, being the Dao. But after all of that, the final thing is you get it done. You take action. You have agency.
Fantastic points. Jason, you were next, but what about this idea of, there is this element of humility that is in this, with the understanding of the limits of one's knowledge, being an important part of understanding this, and maybe specifically talking to princes, as David had alluded to.
Yeah, I like. Thank you, David, to mention about this one. Talk about to prince. I do think this chapter, okay, is talking to the prince. Okay, not talking to regular people like you and me. So if you think about, you are the prince or the ruler of the country, you will find out it's very no paradox here. So at the beginning, okay, Lao Tzu tell the prince, okay, look at, you don't have to go out, then you know everything. You don't have to look through the window, you know the heavenly way, okay. By assuming, okay, if you talk to the farmer, okay, farmer never go out from their town, okay, so this doesn't make sense. But for the prince, they go out, okay. So, and they already know a lot of things, okay. They tell you, you know a lot of things, okay. You don't need to go out. And the last 4 sentences also very interesting. He said, therefore, okay, that's why the sage, when he bring the sage, that means political role model, okay. Without traveling, he know. Without appearing, he is renowned. Without acting, he achieved. Why he talk about this? Because the prince want to know things. The prince want to be renowned. Okay, the prince want to achieve something. Then the Lao Tzu tell the prince, you don't have to go out to know. You don't have to show yourself to be renowned. You don't have to do things, okay, bothering things, then you can achieve. I think that's a non-action teaching to the prince. If you put the audience as a prince, then I think you can resolve a lot of controversy here. But of course, we are the common people. We read this one, we can have free to think about. It tells you the common sense, as you to be confined, be humility, and everything. You can learn from all this one. But I will just bring to the original scene. I think he's talking to the ruler. Okay.
Thank you, Jason. So next up, I have Katie.
Yeah, I think a big place of self-improvement where I was coached was don't say where you don't know. Like don't comment if you really don't know. And then learning to phrase things as speculations, and then working to integrate that into my thinking then makes you come across more knowledgeable, because you're only commenting where you really know, or you're putting it into the perspective of well, I'm speculating out of my depth here.
Thank you, Katie. Aman.
I wanted to offer one more sort of possible take on this, and it's probably the most Machiavellian of all takes, which there are some elements of the Dao De Jing that can be read that way. What if your pupil is a real bastard? But if you have someone who you know is just destined to go, out to commit warfare and atrocity and take on coolie labor, then appealing to, oh, you want renown? Well, this is how you really get it. You want to achieve things. This is how you, there is a manner in which this as a prescriptive text could be used as damage control for some of the worst elements of that time frame, because it's a little hard to sort of think of the before and after. We have an image of sort of the emperor of China, this remote figure locked away in a forbidden city, but that came hundreds of years later. And a couple hundred years before this, what you had were glorified warlords having chariot warfare over honor and trying to prove their worth on the battlefield in brutality in these very stylized battles. And warfare changed, where you get conscripted armies, but the ethos behind it often didn't. So you had a lot of people in positions of power who were looking to go and get, glory and honor from their conquest of the North, of the West, of wherever. And having somebody wise enough to whisper in the ear, hey, this really ain't going to do it for you, but this trick, this will do it for you, was a real good method of damage control as well.
That is a fantastic comment. I mean, it would totally change my perspective on it. And but it's a great point. We're all putting our own spin on this and taking away so much from it. But in a way, looking at it from a perspective that it could just be about damage control is fascinating. That's a great point. Thank you for sharing that. So do we have any additional comments on 47 before we go to 48? See, Jason, we actually went an hour on 40. He said it's the simple ones that people, comment the most on.
Yeah, that's the what Lao Tzu teaching, right? The more you do, the less you do. The shorter the sentence, the longer you discuss. The longer
Exactly.
the sentence, you take shorter time.
So everybody, feel free to line up in the chat, type exclamation point to read your favorite verse, our favorite version of verse 48. Aman,
This is not my favorite version, but it is such a novel version that I have to share it.
Thank you.
This is, who is this translation? I'm sorry, I don't have that handy. Ralph Allen Dahl. And it's the beginning that gets me. He titles this chapter, All is Done Without Doing. To obtain a diploma requires the storage of trivia. To obtain the great integrity requires their abandonment. The more we are released from vested fragments of knowledge, the less we are compelled to take vested actions until all is done without doing. When the ego interferes in the rhythms of process, there's so much doing, but nothing is done. I don't think it's a faithful translation, but it is contemporarily quite entertaining.
It's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. Evanique, followed by Margarita. Oh, you're muted.
So this is chapter 48. This is from God as Nature Sees God, a Christian reading. To pursue learning is to grow a little more each day. To pursue the Tao is to desire a little less every day. Desire less and less until you arrive at a not doing. When you practice not doing, nothing is left undone. If you want to have the whole world, have nothing. If you are always busy doing something, you cannot enjoy the world.
Thank you, Evanique. Next up, I have Margarita.
Yeah, I will read in bahasa.
Thank you.
Yang belajar ilmu pengetahuan, tambah hari tambah maju. Yang meyakini Dao, tambah hari tambah mundur. Tambah hari semakin kecil. Maka pada akhirnya mencapai tingkat tidak berbuat. Tidak berbuat, maka semua selesai. Untuk menguasai, tidak sibuk berbuat. Siapa yang sibuk tidak mampu menguasai. That's it.
Thank you, Margarita. Next up, I have Krishna.
Yeah, I'm going to read from the title of the chapter, Unlearn.
We had a little bit of trouble hearing you.
You might want to trust the video.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to suggest that. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's see.
There you go.
Studying and learning daily, you grow larger. Following the way daily, you shrink. You get smaller and smaller. So you arrive at not doing. You do nothing, and nothing's not done. To run things, don't fuss with them. Nobody who fusses is fit to run things. And this one, she has an interesting comment on it, I think. The word she in the second stanza, my fuss, is troublesome to some translators. Cares quite legitimate translation of it is diplomacy, which would give a stanza I like very much. To run things, be undiplomatic. No diplomat is fit to run things. So that's what she said.
Thank you so much. That's the Ursula Le Guin version. That was actually my favorite version as well when I was looking at the various translations. So next up, I have Mike, followed by Penny.
This is Wayne Dyer again. Learning consists of daily accumulating. The practice of the Tao consists of daily diminishing, decreasing and decreasing until doing nothing. When nothing is done, nothing is left undone. True mastery can be gained by letting things go their own way. It cannot be gained by interfering.
Thank you, Mike. Next up, I have Penny. Penny.
This is Stephen Mitchell. In pursuit of knowledge, every day something is added. In the practice of the Tao, every day something is dropped. Less and less do you need to force things until finally you arrive at non-action. When nothing is done, nothing is left undone. True mastery can be gained by letting things go their own way. It can't be gained by interfering.
Thank you, Penny. Next up, I have David, followed by Madeline.
Okay, let me try the Hendricks version. I think this is, those who work at their studies increase day by day. Those who have heard the Tao decrease day after day. They decrease and decrease until they get to the point where they do nothing. They do nothing, and yet there's nothing left undone. When someone wants to take control of the world, he must always be unconcerned with affairs. For in a case where he's concerned with affairs, he'll be unworthy as well of taking control of the world.
And which version was that? Hendricks, you said?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I had not come across that one. So, Madeline.
This is the Jiafu Feng and Jane English. In the pursuit of learning, every day something is acquired. In the pursuit of Tao, every day something is dropped. Less and less is done until non-action is achieved. When nothing is done, nothing is left undone. The world is ruled by letting things take their course. It cannot be ruled by interfering.
Thank you, Madeline. So now we turn to Jason. Would you like go ahead to share your translation? Thank
Yes.
you, everybody, for sharing your translations. They're
Yeah.
all wonderful.
Okay, so I am going to do a very faithful translation. Okay, and then you may not like it, but I think that's the faithful translation. Stick with the text. Okay, so pursuing knowledge is a process of increasing. Okay, basically they talk about increasing daily. Okay, pursuing the Tao is a process of decreasing daily. Okay, so that's a big question here. Why pursuing Tao? We know pursuing knowledge is increasing. We increasing knowledge. Okay, but why pursuing Tao is a process of decreasing? Okay, I think that's a big question. Okay, I think the Evanic's translation said the reduce your desire. Okay, that's a good way to explain, but that means you put the Tao as something, a moral sense. Okay, put in the moral sense. Okay, but I don't see just be faithful. I don't think here he's teaching moral at this time. Okay, so that's a big question. Why is process decreasing? Decreasing and the decreasing again until Wu Wei, which is non-action, is reached. So we keep decreasing until Wu Wei is reached. So that's here I'm thinking it's tightly related to 47. It's talking about negation, non-action, not doing things and to achieve something. So you are learning things. For example, you are learning mathematics, learning computer programming. You gain your knowledge more and more. But when you practice learning Dao, it's a process of unlearning. Okay, go back to your origin. Okay, original. So I think that's the reason. First, I think it's tied to 47. Second, it explains why the pursuing the Tao is a process of decreasing, opposite to the pursuing knowledge, which is increasing. Okay, so that's the first part. Talk about personal thing, and then this chapter also addressed to the prince. Okay, because you look at the words. Okay, 取天下. Okay, talk about 取天下. Okay, if I have to translate very faithfully, means conquer the world. Okay, you take the world. Okay, so and this word 取天下 has been appeared in many chapters. Chapter 29, 47, 57, 48, 57. They all talk about 取天下, conquer the world. Because during that time is the so-called spring and the winter, or during the warring state, all the prince is thinking about conquer the world or united the nation, if we want to put in the today's sense, unification, unite China. Okay, so that's their concern, the prince concern. So Lao Tzu is teaching, just like, I don't know, Aman talk about damage control. That would be a good way to think about it. Or you talk about a high level strategy. You talk about the very famous sentence, this sentence, 无为而无不为. That means practice 无为, but nothing is undone. That means you practice non-doing, non-action, but nothing is undone. Okay. Then he talked about gain the world. Okay, I just be more instead of using conquer the world, sounds too violent. So I just try to use the word gain the world or rule the world. Okay, by constantly not interfering. And then the last sentence is reverse, the same meaning. Those who interfere cannot gain the world. Okay, I think that's the this chapter is talking about. So start from study, practice Dao, and talk about Wu Wei, then tell the prince how to conquer the world or gain the world, either for damage control or either for the an advice, a strategic advice. That's my translation. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Aman, are you able to comment or?
Yeah, I'm back.
Okay,
I'm
cool.
sorry, my entire computer just decided to shut down and reboot, so it took me a minute. This is the classic everyday learning more and more is gained, every day in obtaining the Tao, more and more is removed, or less and less is gained. There's a diminishment. This is kind of the, I am of the opinion this might be a later addition to the Dao De Jing, because it reads as a very strong indictment of the Confucian culture that developed later in Chinese history, where the obsession was to have a eidetic knowledge of the classics of literature. And so you were constantly striving to be able to not only regurgitate them from memory, but then be able to produce commentary on them. And this really seems like a smackdown of that pursuit. Just, this is not the way that you go about being happier in life, is to try and accrete knowledge, like you're stockpiling, weapons for an army, or like you're stockpiling a retirement fund. You need to give it away. You need to let these things go in order to actually find a happier pursuit in life. It is interesting to think of this in terms of advice to the affluent, because it almost reads like, if you want to, I hesitate to say, but it reads almost as one of Jesus's teaching: to come to me, give away all your riches, get rid of it all, stop, lusting after earthly gains. That's the big takeaway I generally take from 48. And I missed a lot of the commentary, so I apologize.
Oh, no, I mean, your timing was perfect, or your computer's timing was perfect, because you came back just in time. So to make those comments. So thank you. So folks, everybody now type exclamation point to share your takeaways for verse 48. And I have Madeline followed by Ebony.
Well, this first part reminds me of carving, like wood carving. There were some earlier chapters that talked about wood, and I believe especially in Ursula Le Guin's translations,
yes,
of the uncarved block of wood. And so it seems as if that first line could be thought of as sculpture by the process of accretion. And the second line, the process of subtraction. And that the rest of it could be seen in a way as the Wu Wei, the carving, as following the lines and the grains of the wood, the way that you would with water. And so it's not, just as in the previous poem, it's not necessarily, it's not doing, but it's doing things with the grain. And what David had said about returning to a sense of agency at the end, and having a sense of agency, because it does talk at the end of this one too about ruling the world or gaining the world. So this is how to do that.
Yeah, actually, in a minute, I do want to come back to the version Krishna actually had talked about with some of the with the translation, and asked Jason about the translation of the word she. Anyway, I want to come back. Next up is Ebony.
Yeah, just a couple of points from this one. Sorry, I just lost my page.
That's okay.
So what I got from this is kind of like not controlling the situation. Like, we always want to control the outcome, and we do things and we take actions to control an outcome that isn't ours to control. For example, like, you want another person to say something, to do something that you want them to do and to act in a certain way. And that's not under your control unless you were like forcing them to do something. And so I think that was my first thing. And then the second thing was going back to the translation where it talks about desire less and less until you arrive at not doing. And I don't know why it made me think of Stoicism a little bit, but to me, it made me think of that because in Stoicism, it's like desire what you can control, or desire what you can get to, or what's in your control, and not desiring what is not in your control, because I think it just leads to like a more peaceful life. It talks about, if you want to have the whole world, have nothing. If you are always busy doing something, you can't enjoy the world. So at some point, when you have a problem and you want to just let it go, it's like, do all that you can do and then let it go. It's over after that. So I think that's what I got from it. It's just, try not to control so many things, and like take the action that you need to take, and then take a step back and just let things happen as they're meant to be.
Thank you, Avanique. Katie.
Yeah, I'm going kind of piggybacking off what Evanique said. I think the more you let things kind of take their course, it might be, for me, it might be like, let the cops be the cops, let people do their jobs without me worrying about how everything is being done around me and trying to control or worry about what's happening. I think that does lead to, as Evanique was saying, like greater peace and feeling of like, well, I don't have the responsibility for that either. Like just letting things flow as they flow.
Yeah, one of the things that my personal takeaways was along those lines is that the idea of struggling against things as opposed to surrendering to them. Specifically, when I was reading the Ursula Le Guin version, to run things, don't fuss with them. Nobody who fusses is fit to run things. So this idea of trying to control things is ultimately, and things that are whether that are outside your control, that ultimately you're struggling against nature itself. And the more you try to do that, the less tranquil you'll be. So that was one of my major takeaways. But I wanted to ask Jason about the last, the comment that I think Krishna had mentioned with the word she in the second stanza, my fuss is troublesome to translators. Do you know what she's actually saying in that?
That's just my question. I don't see any chi here. And can Krishna tell me which stanza talk about chi?
Well, I don't know what she's referring to. She read a lot of texts. But it's interesting to me that she ended up with the word fuss instead of the word diplomat. And I kind of like fuss better than diplomat.
Yeah, how can I have a diplomat? Because I'm very just stick with the Chinese word. Okay, I try very hard, not go far away. So in this sense, I don't see anything related to chi.
No, it's not she. It's she.
She, S-H-I.
She, not she. She.
Oh,
she.
I'm sorry. Thank you, David.
S-H-I?
Yes.
Yes.
I just put it in the chat.
Yeah, I did.
Oh, you talk about shi. Okay.
Okay. Well, I was way off.
Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting word. Okay. I think Amang and I discussed about this word. You talk about on 48, right? Talk about take the word usually. Okay, let me show the screen one more time. I think you'll be more clear on this one. Okay, sorry, I thought you talk about she. Okay, so I think we talk about this word, 无视. Okay, 视 means in today's sense, or I think in ancient also means the same. It means business. Okay, doing things. So interfering, dealing, I think that's all. If you, again, Chinese word, you can use, every word you can use as a noun, as adjective, as a verb. Okay, 无视. Okay, in this case, you should call as verb. So non-action, non-dealing, non-interfering. So you can see 无为 means non-action. And here is 无视. Okay, that means non-dealing or non-interfering. I think that's the meaning. And this word 无视 come up many times, and every time come out, always associate with conquer the world or gain the world. Okay, so these two, 无视, no interfering, is always connect in Dao De Jing, connect with gain the world.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Aman, and then Brian.
Yeah, we discussed this a little bit, and I do think there's I won't go into the linguistics of it too much. I will say that it's interesting that you see Wu Shi next to Wu Wei almost repetitively. And they form an interesting sort of matching set. Wu Wei, we've discussed ad nauseum. We sort of take it to mean non-action or without action. Wu Shi is more like without, or I like Jason's without interfering, affair, matter, business, any of those kind of work, though it also has a physical sort of double meaning, like matter, thing, item. And so you have in a very no action and no thing. And you're seeing those coupled together here in a very intentional way that I find fascinating. I do think that there's an idea here that Wu Wei, non-action, leads to non-interference or non-accretion, non-things, non-gathering of unnecessary materials, and vice versa. So it has a couple of layers to it, but yeah, it is a difficult word to translate with the same sort of nuance that I think it retains in the Chinese, especially as you see them paired together. Wu Wei, Wu Shi.
Thank you for that. Thank you for those comments. That is actually that is fascinating. Sorry, I was so busy taking notes there. Brian, please.
So when I first read this and was trying to make sense of it in the first two lines, I hit upon the idea that Jason immediately dismissed. The learning has to do with knowledge, and the Dao has to do with desire or losing desire, giving up on desire. The other one that occurred to me is, there's like 4 steps to this to try to make sense of this poem. I have to say, in general, I agree with what Jason's interpretation and the audience. It makes the most sense of this verse for me. At the same time, I really like the things that Aman said, and I think that there is some more general applicability in this verse. The first line, I think, has to do with the past. Learning, you accumulate something. And it's something, when you learn, you accumulate something from the past. When you do the Dao, or pursue or practice the Dao, you're leaving the past behind. So that's the decreasing. And you're looking towards the future and the immediate circumstance. You're looking to do the appropriate thing. And that's kind of maybe another sense of Wu Wei. I don't want to belabor that point. But the next foot that drops here is, I think, the appropriate thing. What's said in this poem is that the appropriate thing tends to be doing as little as possible, going with the flow. So those are kind of the 4 steps I see in this verse. And this is, for this, I always like it when Jason and Aman are here, and everybody else, but obviously they have a tremendous background. Their comments on this verse in particular, I found very, very helpful. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I second that, actually. It changed a lot of what I was actually initially thinking about this. Aman, or Jason after that.
Oh, sorry, Jason.
No, Aman, go ahead. I'm sorry about
that. I don't mean to complicate it, but this verse is probably, at least in part, the reading that was done by whoever was inspired in writing the Zhuangzi in the fable of Butcher Ding, which I know that we're sticking with the Dao De Jing, but the real simple takeaway of the Butcher Ding story is Prince sees Butcher tear apart ox with grace and ease and says, how do you do that? He goes on to say, when I first started approaching oxen to butcher, all I saw was this big massive thing, this big business, this big affair in front of me. After years, and I'm really paraphrasing here, I started to see the cuts. I started to see it like a butcher's chart, where here's a shank, here's a back fat or back strap, et cetera, et cetera. Now I've forgotten all of those things, and I approach it with nothing in my heart. I approach it with the Tao, and my blade glides between the sinews, and the beast just simply falls apart. And there's an idea here that you begin with this mountainous task in front of you. You start to learn the very sort of regimented way of doing this, but at some point, virtuosity in a task comes from being able to forget all of it and being able to allow it to naturally occur. It's kind of that idea of going of flow that
Right.
I think there's another meetup on.
Yes.
And I think that that is implicit within this verse, but I don't think it was necessarily as flushed out an idea as it was later in the Chuangzi, where you see this same sort of sentiment really brought to sort of a practical parable to describe, here's what this actually looks like in action.
Fantastic comments. Jason, you were about to say something as well. Thank you, Aman, for that.
Oh no, I agree.
Oh, you weren't? Okay.
Yeah. That's not much to say. But I just like to mention Zhuangzi and Laozi. They are being categorized as Taoism, but they have a subtle difference. Zhuangzi probably not talking about Wu Wei, okay, or non-action. He talk about Wu Yong, okay, non-functional or non-utility. Utility, but I don't want to complicate, just like Aman said, but it's associate, yeah.
Okay. I have Jang or Margarita, I'm sorry, followed by Jang, then Brian.
Yeah. Reading this chapter, I remember when I was in childhood, my mother told me there's the saying, old saying in Indonesia, belajar sampai ke negeri Cina. That means you learn up to China, because we believe that you need to learn up to the place there you can learn a lot, China at this tradition. I think learning should be also about accumulating knowledge. However, what is true learning? I think true learning is also not just about accumulating knowledge, but also to have this mental flexibility, because there are this moment that you need to unlearn it. So you're not be rigid into understanding this world only within your knowledge. Like, for example, sometimes me with my psychology background, psychologicalizing everything. So how should we do that? I think that's important as parents, as a community. How to this phases of learning will happen continuously up to the point when a person needs to unlearn what you have learned so far, and that require humility. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Very interesting comments. Jang, followed by Brian.
My understanding of this chapter, I think, when we accumulate knowledge, we have more, more things. But when we really learn the principles, then we actually have less. So I think the key point is, like, as we learn more knowledge, we actually understanding the Tao of the underlying principle. Then we can forget all about those details, And the same thing, I think, similar to what I read, the deep thinking or something, it's mentioned about how in the Western world we tend to rush around like busy doing nothing, hurry going nowhere. So I really like this sentence. That's very typical. Like it seems everybody's calendars fill, then they feel they're productive. And they mentioned actually the people can be real productive if they can really be quiet and think deeply instead of rushing around. And I think that's what this actually talking about. You know, so because when you really need to do things, you have to understand the situation. You need to be quiet and understand how the things are going. And then you just do a little bit, then you make big impact instead of like you have no idea what's going on, just rushing around, jumping in, like it's very stupid way to be busy and not productive.
No, that's an interesting link to what actually Aman had just said. You know, when we first start a task and how we approach it, but after a certain amount of time, and how you framed it was in the idea of principles and how these principles can actually start to simplify the way we think and act. And how it just Aman phrased it again with what he was talking about with a butcher shop, where you're just able to let go and just able to do the task, and things come easily to you. The idea that things are simplified with the more knowledge that we're incorporating is actually a very interesting perspective. All right, I'm talking too much. So I have I believe Brian, followed by Madeline, and then Krishna.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I have a comment and then a quick question. I would agree with this last set of comments. I was going to say some of the things that had been said, but it's basically in line with what Aman had said. And I'll just flag that you know, that my single previous encounter with the Tao was through a series of lectures by Jerry Garfield, who I think is well known in this area, but that was his bottom line, was that you move from mastery to virtuosity. And in that step, you leave something behind, you know, you move forward. In this verse here, we're talking about decreasing, but really and then the last lines and the story that Aman shared from the other author, I thought was really tied it all together for me. That's just you know, that I think I'm understanding what everybody's saying and it makes sense to me. The other question though, and this doesn't have to be, I would like at some point to find out or to hear how it is that this verse is coupled with or related to or complements the previous verse, because I'm kind of losing touch with that. I think Jason put out that these two are related, and we'll understand the first after we've read the second. I'm kind of lost in that area.
Okay, so Brian, okay, okay, put it this way. If you look at the 47, you see a lot of negative definition. They talk about without traveling, without appearing, without acting, right? To achieve something, to be renowned, to know by without doing things. So if you look at on the second stanza, they're talking about pursuing the Tao is a process of decreasing. That means negative action, just opposite to the learning knowledge, which is increasing. So in this moment, in this the second stanza, I think it's tightly connected with previous chapter, which talking about negative negation, right? So after they talk about the 48 talk about decreasing and the decreasing again until 无为 is reached. Then you go back to talk about non-action again, same as 47, right? Talk about without action, you can achieve. Okay, and here it also talk about without action, without daring, okay, you can gain the world. And in this sense, I see these two chapters should read together and explain each other. Okay, so if you explain the second stanza of chapter 48 as reduce your desire, then that's the way to practice style. Then of course there's no connection. But if you read politically and consider they are talking, Lao Tzu is talking about without doing things to achieve something, then you will see these two connected. I hope I answer your question, but because I have a certain way to interpret, not interpret, to faithfully read it. Okay, then you see the connection.
Yes, thank you. And a thought occurred to me as you were saying that. In some circumstances or contexts, would it be fair to think of Wu Wei as without effort instead of without action?
Yes, that's correct. Okay, Wu Wei is not. It's a very difficult concept. It's not means you sit there, do nothing, being lazy. That means you so-called you practice Wu Wei, but nothing is undone. You still have the same finish. Just like the best manager you see, just have the hands off. But doesn't mean that he doesn't do anything, right? He watches, he sees it, he understands, but he probably not interfering. That's why Amman said, and we all agree, that when many times when Lao Tzu talk about Wu Wei, constantly he talk about Wu Shi, okay, not interfering, and then connect with conquer the world or gain the world. So that's the political sense, right? If you want to, let's say not necessary, let's put it in today's sense, you are a CEO of the company, you want to expand your business. It's not necessary to travel around the world, aggressively compete with your competitor. It could be practice Wu Wei, okay, let go. And then, then you still can do the work, can achieve your purpose.
Thank you.
Thank you both. So next up we have Madeline, followed by Krishna. But I'll let Amman actually just make a quick comment. Go ahead, or take it,
I actually was really enjoying the discussion between Brian and Jason there. And I wanted to defend what Jason was saying a little bit about the distinction in the Zhuangzi. He's correct. The words Wu Wei never actually appear in the Zhuangzi. But the metaphor, I do believe, is there. And sort of tapping into that Lakoff and Johnson idea of embodied metaphor that I think we've discussed briefly in the past, that thinking in metaphor, being able to sort of give an embodied vision of ideas, that's what I think comes through in the Zhuangzi much more distinctly, with an image like the butcher Ding, cutting, just swishing his way through a gigantic ox and watching this beast fall apart. So even though Jason's correct, the distinct words Wu Wei are not in the Zhuangzi, I think the concept does come through in the work. It is one of these great stories in the Zhuangzi where Wu Wei is embodied or is placed in metaphor as much as possible. And it is a passage like this where that concept arises from. And so to what Brian was saying before about efficient or about easy work or easy action, ease of action as opposed to non-action, the way I used to describe it to students was, if you go to swim in a river, you have a couple of choices, but ultimately the river wins. If you try and swim against the current, the river will still eventually win. If you try and swim across the river, you're going to wind up on a lower bank because the river still wins. The only way you successfully swim, quote unquote, a river is to do as little as possible to float on it, allow it to take you, and do just the work necessary to not crash into rocks or drown. And that would be the minimum amount of necessary action to make sure that what isn't undone is your ability to breathe.
Fantastic comments, fantastic dialogue, guys. So next up I have Madeline, followed by Krishna, then Evanique, followed by Katie.
Wow, well, this is all amazing.
It is.
I was also thinking about embodiment. I guess I had been thinking that these two chapters are much less physical than many of the earlier chapters in the book, which were full of things about the body and the senses and buildings and nature and the world. And maybe that's why my mind had turned to wood carving. Thank you, Aman, for bringing up good old cook Ching, the butcher. That had briefly flitted through my mind. I didn't want to drag in the big bloody corpse of the ox, but I think that it is here because there is the non-action, or I'll call it the non-effort in action. And then there's also in the pairing of the two woos, the non-action and the non-matter or non-affair. So it would seem that the action would be the cook or the carver, and the matter or the affair or the business would be the dead ox, and maybe it's the chef. Or the person reading the chapter is the knife personified, which is gliding through, neither making the big effort nor identifying too much with the matter in front of it. And I was interested in the word at the end that Jason had translated as gain or conquer, because my translation had said to rule. And I thought that was very interesting because of the idea of if it's gain or conquer, then that goes kind of right back to the beginning of the poem, which is to not about learning and acquisition versus paring away and dropping things. But it's really in the paring away and dropping things of a corpse of the ox or of the wood carving that you end up with the thing that you want at the end, whether it's a gain in food, or it could be a sculpture or a piece of furniture.
Thank you, Madeline. Jason, do you want to comment?
Yeah, just want to answer Madeline's question about the last word. I say kanko. I'm not satisfied with my translation because it doesn't faithfully represent the word Lao Tzu is using. And I think I should be more serious on this word because Lao Tzu used this word at least 3 times, okay, in 81 chapters, okay. They call 取天下. The word 取, okay, 天下 means the world or the country. 取 is not conquer, not gain, okay. 取 means take, and in a way of easily take, okay. That means like I take just in a snap, I take it, okay, quickly, easily. That's the meaning of the word. So if I have to faithfully translate, I should say, without doing any interfering, you should be able to quickly, easily control the word. Okay, that probably that's the the meaning of this one. So I still debating what would be the best translation, but at this moment, I probably still use gain the word or rule the word. But by the word meaning means snap. Okay, quickly take it.
Madeline, do you want to comment?
Yes, thank you, Jason. That was great. It reminded me of a word we discussed recently about doing things easily, that might have been translated as knack. Is that related to this term?
Not related, but same feeling. That means 巧. That's a skill, a snack, a skill, but it's a little bit negative, a little bit small scale. Okay, so for example, you do the wood carving, that could be, the small thing. You could use the word 巧, but for like building a ship, you will hardly use 巧, you will use skillful. That's the difference. But I think if you say 取 as it's hard to explain, but this word is different sense, means easily take. Okay, that's on this one. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So next I have, hang on, I'm sorry, lost my track there for a moment. I had Krishna.
This has been brought up many times before, but I didn't bring it again.
You may want to shut your
simple
camera off. Sorry about that. You're just breaking up there. There you go.
Simplifying things is about the Tao, but and it's about in a lot of different subjects in science, programming, and Jewish. They have a concept of the tetragrammaton, and it's certainly very simple, but it is not absolutely simple. It is there's four things, 4 letters, right? And so nowhere have I seen is there a talk about the limit of simplicity. You don't want things to be too simple. You want to be them just simple enough, but never take away too much.
Thank you. Ebony.
Yeah, I was listening to what everybody was saying, and this word kept coming up to me, sacrificing for something better, and I was thinking of Amon's example of the ox and how the butcher had to approach. First, he approaches as this big mass, and then as a diagram, and then that dropped off, and it was just like easy or in flow. But I'm wondering, I'm wondering what had to be sacrificed in order for that to happen. I mean, was it like maybe once he had like the diagram and then had to go with the flow, did he have to like sacrifice pride, or like what did he have to sacrifice to get to that level? I guess is my question. That level of proficiency, what had to be given up? I just had that question.
Mon, would you like to try and tackle that, or?
I can take a crack, and I can only give one absolute answer, which is alternatives.
Right.
In the pursuit of anything, to do it means to not do something else. To do it so well as to become an aficionado at it means sacrificing pursuits of other things to do it and do it and do it and do it and do it again. As to what degree of sacrifice is rational, reasonable, or healthy, I do think that varies. I don't necessarily know that all of us want to spend the 10,000 hours to become a grand butcher. But I've actually often thought about, what is the sacrifice for greatness? I think there was a wonderful movie that came out years ago called Whiplash that took one very honest look at that exact subject. J.K. Simmons plays a conductor in a conservatory of musicians, and this young man decides to sacrifice to become the greatest drummer ever, which is the most non-producing skill that one could think of. You literally are just beating a skin with a stick. But his commitment is absolute. His enthusiasm is unquestioning. And what he's willing to give up are real sacrifices that I don't think we take seriously in a lot of our feel-good versions of excellence as some higher good in our culture. And that's why I do think it is significant that the character in the fable is a butcher, a job that is menial, that would be looked down upon, that isn't necessarily something any prince should have any admiration for. But through this very lowly person who probably does this because he has to, not because it was his passion, but he committed as fully to doing it as well as possible, and in that found that virtuosity in the task. And I think you can see any number of people where that sort of tale rings true into the modern day. What have they sacrificed? Other pursuits would be the one thing I could absolutely say with absolute certainty. But what those pursuits are, individual to individuals, will vary.
Fantastic comments. So next I have up Katie wants to be skipped. But Jason, you wanted to comment on something, and then Brian.
Yeah, I'd like to answer Evanik's question about what the butcher did sacrifice. The answer is you asked the wrong question, okay? Because he didn't sacrifice, okay? The way he can achieve this, he said he used the knife for the blade for 19 years, he never sharpened, okay? So he goes through all the space, okay, without facing any resistance. That's the way he achieved it, because he can understand, okay, the structure, everything of the cow, the ox, and he moved the blade through without facing any resistance. That he can achieve. So he didn't sacrifice anything. The interesting thing is he performed the ox carving business in front of a king. After seeing this, the king says, I understand how to nourish my life. So he doesn't say great skill, great job, wonderful. He say, I know how to nourish my life, because he understands avoid all the resistance is the way to nourish your life or your so I think that's the if I have to answer your question, that's the story of the cook din is talking about.
Thank you. Fantastic comments again. Brian. Yeah.
Okay, I don't have Jason's last words on this verse. I'd be happy to look at those if he wanted to put them up, but I can use the last words here from some of the other translations that I've got here. Let's take this one, for example, from J.H. MacDonald. Mastery of the world is achieved by letting things take their natural course. You cannot master the world by changing the natural way. So we're getting at this concept by talking about the actors, the audience's intent to master things. To get another perspective on this, can we also ask the question, does the Wu Wei or the Tao, does that mean letting the natural way guide you and letting things the natural course take its way, being your way? I think the answer to that probably is yes, but it just is turning the thing in a mirror image. And of course, I think my impression is that the important part of that is that you cannot be set on a certain outcome. And that other than the mastery that comes through being guided by the Tao. So another way a final way that struck me is that the Tao is about a process, but this grammar here is about entities, the actor and his circumstance. The actor and the circumstance are really one, and they're engaged in a process, but that's not the way it's captured in the grammar, the syntax.
No, not for that particular, not for McDonald's version, the one that you just shared. But Jason, actually, what were the last words in your verse?
I think Armand posted on the.
Oh, he did.
Yeah, he posted it. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, okay. So, yes, practice.
Yeah, gain the world by.
Oh, gain the world by constantly not interfering. Those who interfere cannot gain the world. Interesting point. Madeline.
Yes, as regards Taoism, the non-action and the non-matter, non-business, non-affairs, the two of those put together seem as if they could either be, well, it seems, I guess, very yin in terms of sort of the passivity or the non-doing, the absence and the void? Or would the two of those put together be more like the Tao as a whole?
I can take a crack at that.
Yeah, that I was. Thank you. I was trying to think how to the best way to answer that myself.
I would say the answer is both. I think one mistaken impression we often have when we look at a Daiji symbol that has yin yang, interplaying, is the mistaken idea that there needs to be equal amounts in order for there to be balance, because the symbol is produced in equal ratios, equal amounts. But the world does not require equal amounts yin and yang. You could not live if you were equal amounts solid matter and empty space. You couldn't have a universe that was equally filled with things and had empty space. You actually need much more yin in existence for the little bits of yang to actually have any real chance at making a difference. The other way to think of this is you kind of need 32 people for a successful gene pool, but only 2 of them really have to be a male. We are not as yang is not as prolific in the natural world, and therefore the Taoist prescription is to know yang, but stick with yin. It is definitely much more abundant. It's definitely much more the leaning or the inclination of the Tao. And so all the admonishments of Taoism tend to encourage more yin behavior 98% of the time, with a 2% margin for error to be very, very yang.
Thank you. And thank you, Madeline, would you like to
Yeah,
make a
thanks.
quick response, please?
That actually reminded me, it sounded very quantum physics-ish, or at least subatomic physics. Like those, when the world is looked at upon that scale, here it seems dense with matter, especially if we envision air as matter as well. But on that subatomic scale, it's kind of sparse in terms of matter with lots and lots of space.
Macro or micro, the analogy still works. I have to sign off. Good night, all. Thank you.
Good night, Aman. Thank you for your comments, as always.
Thanks, Aman.
Brian, do you have a comment? It looks like you wanted to say something, maybe, or did I misinterpret that?
I'm still puzzling out this last question I had using Jason's words. So taking the very last line, those who interfere cannot gain the world. And I guess those who interfere cannot gain the world. That's probably true because it just is a practical, I don't know what it means to gain the world. What's the world? But, he put that in a historical context. You cannot, I don't think anybody can gain the world, or nobody can gain everything or get everything they want. But it says here, those who interfere cannot gain the world.
Okay, let me readdress my point. Gain the world means not really, yeah, you are right, nobody can really gain the world. But gain the world means you control the world. Okay. If you take this one, you take the world, you control the world. Actually, they do have the people gain the world during that time. The Qing dynasty, okay, he eventually gained the world, okay, but not doing non-action. He's conquering one by one, turn out. Okay, so that's another story. But actually, they can gain the world. But use among the words, damage control. Okay, so he tells the prince who has ambition to conquer, at that time, let's say, had 7 nations, to conquer the 7 nations, to unite China together. He tells him, don't do the butt busy around, okay, conquer this, take this one, have a southern war, okay, do nothing, okay, don't interfere in. Eventually, you will gain the war. Believe or not, that I'm not going to say that, but turn out that somebody gain the war. But unfortunately, he's not following Laozi, he's following legalism, which is, reward and the punishment. So
yeah.
Which is actually, the exact opposite of that, which is like, complete control.
But
in a
again,
way.
it's not exactly opposite. The legalism actually is reading out, but interpret in a different way. He talked about not interfering, means the boss, the leader, not interfering, and that your general to do the business. That's what he is talking. The legalism interpretation. So it got a little bit complicated, but the legalism actually learned the lesson from Laozi. Okay.
But didn't Hanfei's legalism, right? Didn't he have a more of a different perspective on human nature as a whole?
Yes.
He had an idea that was inherently bad, essentially, so that it needed to be controlled.
Yeah, because his teacher is Confucius. Okay.
Right.
Confucius, but unlike Mencius, believe human nature is good. His teacher, even he is Confucianism, but his belief, Xunzi, believe human nature is bad. So you need education. Okay, that's Xunzi. But his student, Hanfei, take a different way, because this advice, he is not telling the people, he telling the prince.
Right.
Okay? When you tell the prince and assuming human nature is bad, you are not talking about education. You were talking about reward and the punishment, because you're people just like animal. Okay, so you just reward them and punish them, and you will do the work. So really depend on who is your audience.
Interesting. There's a reason why I love those Saturday afternoon meetups. So thank you. So everyone, this has been another fantastic session. I really can't thank Amon and Jason enough. Brian, thank you for your comment. Everybody, thank you for your comments. It's it really is a privilege, as I'd mentioned previously, to be here. And tonight was just a really, really fun night. I think this is one of my favorites, actually. And yeah, unfortunately, Jason, we didn't get to 49. So
I think I was wrong. I need to study Taoism more deeply, because the shorter will take longer. Okay, I remember that the chapter 18 of science is very long. Okay, and I think we probably need 2 sections. But turn out that nobody had a comment, and we finished like 20 minutes.
yeah, it's so much easier to comment when it's simple and straightforward. Then you can interpret it any way you want, really. I mean, you can put your own. You can look at the different versions of it, and then everybody can put their own meaning to it. So I think that it's when it's too complicated, sometimes people just don't necessarily get involved. That's just some thoughts. Anyway, this is fantastic. I should probably announce what's coming up. So tomorrow we have the perils of the single story or one solution, and that's Comprehensivist Wednesdays. That's being hosted by Maritza, and that's being done in conjunction with the Philadelphia Thinking Society. Thursday, 7 p.m. we have Consider Growth Leadership. That's one of our best series, in my opinion. It's because I'm hosting it with Jeff. So, but it really is. He brings such a wealth of knowledge when it comes to the area of leadership. And if you can get to one of them, it's really worth your time. I guarantee it. And that's on Thursday at 7. And at 9 o'clock that evening, we have the Gospel of John, chapter 3, verses 22 to 36. And as let me see, and we have the Bhagavad Gita. I don't know what we're covering on it's not coming up on my screen right now, but we'll be covering that on Friday at 9 o'clock. So thank you, everybody.
I'd like to give a shout out for Jeff's Thursday as well, even though I've not been able to attend. I went to one of them, and I think he's talking about things that there's nothing more important than what Jeff is talking about, in my opinion. He's showing how, in a very eloquent way, to exercise power in the world. And it's through teamwork. And not just exercise power, but to do good things. So, and do it in a good way. So I think it's that is a wonderful, wonderful series.
Yeah, I really thank you for saying that, Brian, because it really is one of the most intriguing and important meetups that we've been hosting. And Jeff has such a wealth of knowledge in that area. And he's integrating new concepts into and the world is changing at such a rapid pace. He's even talking about how leadership applies in the digital world, which has really been helpful for me personally, how people make transitions. It just gives you a whole new perspective from how organizations operate, and actually how you can even incorporate some of these concepts into your life. So again, if you can get there at 7 p.m. on Eastern Standard Time on Thursday evening. So thank you for saying that, Brian. I really appreciate that. All right, everyone, have a great evening.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.